So I have an opening thinker for you all. And I really think this takes a little bit of deep thought and just getting us ready for our fantastic presenter today. And I'll put in the chat as well. But my opening question is, where have you seen MTSS making a positive change for kids with disabilities? So where have you seen MTSS making a positive change for kids with disabilities? You're welcome to use your mic, to put it in the chat, or just to gnaw on it in your brain for a little bit. I think everyone's gnawing on it in their brain, which is very telling as far as I'm concerned, that no one had like snappy, like no one was like hitting the buzzer, like this is where I saw it. It's maybe a little bit harder to express. Okay. And as we're getting ready to get into the meat of it, which is going to be about what are the components of an integrated MTSS model? How do you measure their fidelity? We love fidelity in the SPDIG, right? And there's always a desire for more. And so we brought back our fantastic presenter, who was our keynote at the SPDIG national meeting, to talk about it. But before we get into that, Kelsey is going to launch a couple of poll questions just so Jennifer can get a sense of what folks are doing when it comes to measuring fidelity with MTSS. And you should see a question right now. So the first question is, what types of fidelity are you measuring for MTSS? Is it instruction, intervention, school-wide, district, other? And Kelsey, can they choose more than one?
Yes, yeah, you should be able to choose multiple.
Awesome. Very good. Oops, I accidentally lost it. Could you put that up again? Kelsey, are you able to show the results?
Oh, sure.
Okay, thanks. I think it was my fault. So what types of fidelity are you measuring for MTSS? So school-wide, district fidelity. So lots of supporting teams, I take that to mean. And so more, probably more systems coaching going on. I'm going to assume 75% school-wide, 67%. The actual intervention, which is Jennifer Pierce, by the way, now a requirement for the SPDIG, that they have a fidelity measure for intervention that they can connect with the child outcome. Instruction, and then other. And if anyone said other and they want to share or put that in the chat, that'd be great. And then we have a second question, right, Kelsey?
Yeah, let me pull that up.
What are the specific fidelity tools you are using? And you're able to just type that in there. And while people are thinking and answering, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jennifer Pierce, project director of an IES study of MTSS fidelity, integrated MTSS, and again, our fabulous keynote speaker from recently. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. And Kelsey, can I share my screen or do you? Okay, great. All right. So I'm going to pull up my slides while you guys are putting that in there and get that going on the right. I got to talk myself through it all here as I do this. So I'm Jennifer Pierce. Nice to see you again. Your names, your faces, whatever you're able to do in this virtual world for the time that we have together. I'm from AIR, American Institutes for Research. And I am going to talk to you today about a study that's near and dear to my heart and the tool that we developed in that study, which we call the IMFR, the Integrated MTSS Fidelity Rubric. And on my bucket list, just a little fun fact here, which I guess is one of the popular items for people to speak to. My bucket list is travel, but I'd actually like to live in Europe. So this is a picture of Florence. It doesn't have to be Florence. I'm not going to be picky. I'm just going to put it out there into the universe of somewhere in Europe I'd like to live at some point in my life. And I'll also push us over to today's agenda, and then we'll probably be able to see the results of that second poll question that Kelsey had up. We've got 3 things that we're going to do today. We'll talk about IMTSS, make sure there's a little bit of level setting, and what the heck do I mean by IMTSS, integrated MTSS? And I'll share just a peek into the suite of materials that we've developed in our study to measure integrated MTSS. I'll talk about the INFR study, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll have a little bit of time about supporting implementation in schools. And our objectives for today align to the agenda. So I'm going to stop right there to see if there's any results, Kelsey, that you want to display up here. And if I should stop sharing. Oh, there they go. Oh. So it doesn't tell us the answers, I think.
Oh no, I'm
Everyone
sorry.
answered.
Thought it would. I thought it would just show what people typed. I'll have to share them
Yeah.
after the
Okay,
meeting here.
that sounds great. And while Kelsey is doing that, is there anything anyone wants to offer up about your responses into the poll add-on, or clarify, share a little bit about what those tools are? Okay, hearing nothing, that does not have to be your only opportunity, but hearing nothing, I will go ahead and move us on for now. So I mentioned this term integrated MTSS. And what the heck does that mean? Is this a new version of tiered systems? Maybe you're well versed in the idea of integrated MTSS or IMTSS. And I've got a definition here from McIntosh and Goodman's 2016. I'd consider it now pretty seminal text on integrated MTSS. It really gets into the weeds of what integrated tiered systems are. If that's something you'd like to know more information about, check that out if you haven't already. But beyond just a written definition, I wanted to put together something that kind of visually depicts this idea. And so in tiered systems of support, we tend to have a couple of different situations happening. And the first one reflected here by these spools of thread, and that we have these siloed academic tiered systems of support, and then we have a siloed behavior, social emotional type system of support in place in schools, and never the two shall connect, and that there are separate teams, there are separate procedures, there are separate schedules sometimes, and they run in fairly siloed ways. That's a typical implementation approach to tiered systems of support. The other type of approach is to have just kind of a messy tangle, a web of different tiered systems of support, where some pieces of an academic system might talk to the other side of the tiered system of support. And so maybe there's some kind of combination, intertwining of the supports and services that happen in both of those tiered systems of support. But quite frankly, it's kind of a hot mess. And so the idea with integrated tiered systems of support is where you bring those two sides, the academic side, the social, emotional, behavioral side, together in a strategic, purposeful way, where we are combining those systems of support to better meet the comprehensive needs of all students. And this actually was the original idea of MTSS. And now we are just doing a little bit more. We now know more about the idea of MTSS and the fact that it's really hard to implement these two systems cohesively and with coherence. And so we're doing now that we've been in implementation of MTSS for at least 10 years, we're doing a little bit of rebranding and reframing with the idea that it's not about having these two siloed systems, it's about having the two systems talk strategically together so that students can benefit from our original intention of having these tiered systems of support in schools. And so that is what integrated MTSS is. And hopefully that aligns to what you know, or now kind of clarifies some of that terminology that you might have heard.
And
So
Jennifer, just for the
yes.
many tools bullet, your first bullet,
Yeah.
Kelsey did, because I know you can't see the chat. Kelsey did paste some of the responses in the chat. The
Great.
RTFI,
Yes.
and the TFI, DSFI, DCA, District Capacity Assessment. And then we have CICO, check in, check out. Yeah. And then SAM, which I believe started
Yes.
in Florida and then has been,
Yeah,
Those-
yeah. I thank you for sharing that. You're drawing my attention to that. And I think you're right. Your comment there about throwing spaghetti at the wall. Yes. And, this is not to say that schools and educators aren't and leaders aren't working hard. We're really working hard at trying to make this happen in our schools. But the problem is that it's very confusing and complicated. And so the idea of IMTSS is complicated in and of itself. Implementing it is very complicated. And to make it even harder is that there wasn't a tool previously that had been specifically designed for measuring the implementation of the integration of tiered systems. And that there are many, many tools out there, including the really solid ones that you've put into the chat. Plus, there's some more that are out there for measuring tiered systems of support. And yet the field still lacked a tool that measured integration that had been psychometrically validated, and that is reliable and valid for measuring that integration of tiered systems. And so there was a need for this tool, and AIR was able to be a part of then the development and testing in this study with our partners, the University of Missouri, to put this tool together, test it, and now release it. So you might be, hopefully you're clamoring now to know what the heck is in this tool and what does it include. And I want to give you a window into it because I'm not allowed to yet share the full tool with you. However, I will say that at CEC, we are formally launching the tool and the suite of materials, and all of it will be publicly available on the MTSS Center website that AIR has. And you'll be able to see all of it plus the additional materials that go with it. But I will give you a window into the content of that tool because I think that's also something else you'll probably want to know is, well, what is included in the tool itself. So this screen shows just one of the pages and then the cover here of the tool itself, and illustrates some of the information that's in there. So let me get into a little bit of a very quick deeper dive of the information that's in that tool, this tool. So the INFR is made up of 4 domains or big ideas of IMTSS. And these probably are not that unfamiliar to you. There's nothing really that surprising about the information, the core components of IMTSS. And those are reflected in these 4 domains that we have here on the left hand of the slide: instruction and intervention, assessment, this stands for database decision making, and infrastructure. And each of those domains are broken down into items. These items are also probably very familiar to you and not that surprising. For example, the instruction and intervention domain includes tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. You can see what the assessment domain includes, and so on and so forth. And I think, yes, professional learning is its own section, and infrastructure, absolutely, it is one of our 14 items that we have here. So again, the 4 domains with the 14 in total items that we have over here. And as a reminder, these items and domains are measured, and I'll show you the scales that we have here in the next slide, in academics and social emotional behavior supports, specifically in reading and math on the academic side, and then on the social emotional behavioral side, we do not break it down, but we call it social emotional behavioral supports, or SEB for short, because that's kind of a mouthful. So we do measure those 2 overarching areas in our tool. And This is an example of our one of our two scales. So we do have two scales in this measure, which is also pretty unique, but there was a very clear reason from our data that as to why we needed to have two scales. And so this scale is used for all of the domains except for infrastructure. And again, I'll explain that in just a second. And you can see here it is an continuum from a school, rating a school on each of those items. For example, tier 1 in this scale from beginning all the way over here to sustaining. And what we're essentially looking at is at the degree to which integration is happening in an academic area like reading and in social emotional behavioral supports. And the more integration that is happening in each of those items, like in tier 1, then the further along a school would be on this scale. And I'm just going to fast forward here for the sake of time. I mentioned that we have two scales. So this scale is only for the infrastructure items. For example, school leadership, professional learning, school-wide culture. And notice the scale is different. It is a 4-point scale, but more importantly, what this scale measures is the degree to which there is support for integration. And from kind of zooming out and a logical standpoint, this actually makes a lot of sense, because if you're trying to measure integration of school leadership, what exactly does that mean? What does that look like? It just doesn't really come together as a concept. But it does make sense that school leaders, it's important to measure the degree to which school leaders support integration and the degree to which professional learning supports integration. And so that is what that scale is measuring rather than measuring integration itself. And I see we've got a comment in here from Annette. The scale directly aligns with a rubric. Oh, interesting. Created by Joanne. Oh, that's for assessing educator PD. I'm going to have to take a look at that. That's super helpful. Annette, thanks for popping that into the chat. All right. And so a couple of other things here I want to mention before we get into some engagement opportunities is that the way that our ratings are provided is at the item level. And you might be familiar, I know you are because some of you are using it, with the TFI, where from what I understand, the ratings can kind of roll up to be a domain level type of a rating. In the IMFR, we actively decided that that's not how we were going to handle our rating scale. Now, technically, you could roll up the items into a domain level score. But what we learned is that it was very important for schools to understand how and the ways in which they could better integrate in each of those 14 items, so that it is more meaningful to have for a school to have an item level score than a domain level score. And the usability of our tool was extremely important to us. We want something that works for schools. And so that is why there are item level ratings rather than like an overall score for IMTSS or a domain level score. I also mentioned we have a suite of materials that support the rubric itself, which is what we call the tool for measuring integration. So we've got an interview protocol. It's highly structured with very specific questions to get at integration in the 14 items. There's a scoring worksheet for someone to use to help make sure that they're coming to correct scoring decisions and therefore accurately rating the school in the 14 items. And we've got an administration manual that we're nearly almost finished developing, as well as a series of online training modules, all of which will be free to accompany the IMFR, so that schools, districts, state leaders, you name it, if you're interested in using this, you've got access to it and can administer it and score the results and provide the results to the school for free. We've got some dissemination coming up and efforts. And the main thing to know is that March 14th is our formal launch day at CEC. We've got some sessions that we're doing there. AIR has a booth. Please come and see us, and we'd be happy to provide you with more information about it. Or you can always just pop over to the web to see the materials themselves. So that was a lot of me talking, giving you a window into what the INFR is, and just some questions for us to consider here are posed on the slide. And I'm going to try to pull up my cameras as well here to see you while looking at this, looking at these questions. And I think we've got a breakout later, so I think we're going to do this more of like a whole group type of a thing. And so if you can come over come off of mute and contribute into the phone line, or use the chat, whatever would work for you for responding to these questions.
Yeah, just as you all were seeing the components that are included, were there elements that you were surprised weren't there, or were there any that popped out at you, like for me, for professional learning, key to anything, that you thought, oh, this is really critical that they included it?
I'll just come off mute really quickly. I had just texted my colleagues in Virginia when this came up, and I thought we had just done some revision of our initial implementation matrix. I just texted him and I said, I really like how this is laid out. I think this makes a lot of sense. It's not too many. You've got everything critical in there. If we did these things well, we would be well on our way. So thank you.
And that was Regina from VTS, Virginia Tiered Systems of Support, just because it doesn't automatically show up who's talking for us. I want to make sure. And then in
thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you, Regina. And then in the chat, Erin Axa, and she's from Colorado. I'm wondering about family engagement. Is that embedded in the infrastructure domain?
Yes, absolutely. And we also include it in database decision-making, where as a part of the scoring process, it is actually part of the criteria for schools to be able to articulate how they involve families and partners in the database decision-making process, which is a stretch, by the way. And this is something that we found was one of the most, this domain right here, database decision-making, was the hardest for schools. Our schools really, in our sample, we had about 115, 114 schools, and consistently we found that database decision-making had the lowest scores, and that was the clear challenge area for schools. But yes, rest assured that family engagement is a part of the procedures in database decision-making, and is embedded within the scoring criteria for infrastructure down here as well. You are right.
And Jennifer, I know you're about to answer the second, the chat question from Carol Quirk, but in the second I have, what I see across SPDIGs is that family engagement is generally the very lowest of the scores. So, and people are being honest, they're sharing their data with us, but that's just something to think about as part of DBDM, that will also affect things.
Yeah, and the other question there about DBDM, is it including collaborative teaming structures? Yeah, and we actually started off in we had 3 versions of this because we did 3 iterations of development and testing and refining based on results. In our very first version of the tool, we didn't have database decision-making as a domain, we had teams. And what we found was that it was not making it was not prioritizing enough the idea that it's not so much about the team that's meeting, it's about the processes the different teams use for making decisions based on data. And so we shifted it. We've changed it to focus not on the team itself, but on the processes of database decision making and the people and processes involved in universal database decision making, like the decision making that happens for all students. And then our other item down here in this domain is targeted. So for those students who need additional support, how are we using data to come to the decisions about who gets that support? What supports are needed? Is the student's progress monitored over time? How are families involved in that process? And so we've really tried to make it clear about what does it look like to engage in database decision making for all students and for some students and for the students with the most intensive needs. And the fourth one in here, let me get my cursor to the right place, is this item of continuous improvement. And this one is all about the school level database decision making that happens to examine progress overall for implementation on at least an annual basis. And that idea is probably something we know is important, but also is very unlikely to occur in schools. When it comes to examining, is IMTSS making a difference for all of our kids at the school level year to year? And that is something that kind of falls by the wayside for sure. We learned that in our study.
Yeah,
You're
and
welcome.
I'll be interested to hear both from Regina, from VTSS, and from the IMFR as you all start getting data back, hopefully from states, how it goes integrating the family engagement piece as opposed to having it separately, the messaging. And so Jennifer, that leads me to a question. Will you have a data system where folks might plug it in, or they're just going to use the IMFR and you won't ever have their data per se?
Yeah, right now we do not have an online data system that will accompany our tools, but we need it. Like, I think we need an app is what we need so people can just quickly use it. That's probably another like round of funding and testing, but definitely the vision is there. And we are investing in IMTSS and the work of this study at AIR to ensure that we keep developing the things that are needed out there for supporting the use of the IMFR.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. All right, so I am going to suggest that we take a quick peek at the handouts that you hopefully have received prior to our call today, but I think Kelsey so graciously just popped those into the chat. Thank you, Kelsey, for putting that in there. So this is 2 handouts are coming your way in that file. And one is the results of the study that I've been talking about, the IMFR study. And it looks like this right here is the handout. And then the second page of that we'll talk about in a little bit. But for now, if you could just take a peek at that first page and then give you some time for individual reflection, and then we'll discuss.
Yep. So let's plan on coming back together. I'm going to personally turn off my mic and camera, and we'll come back together in 5 minutes, which would be 33 after the hour. So we'll see you back then. And if you have any questions, let us know in the chat or use your mic. All right, we're right at 33 after. I'm looking forward to hearing thoughts. What grabbed your interest? What questions do you have about the study? And is there any work you do that could be communicated via a similar handout? That last question was from me because I thought this is such a fantastic idea. Who doesn't want to get one page that tells you everything you need to know about something? So I'll turn it back over to you, Jennifer.
Yeah, I got to thank AIR Studio Department for always having templates at the ready for us to compile and present findings like that. All right, so I'll open up the floor again over the phone line, via the chat, whatever works for you. I'm happy to tell you a little bit more about the study, things that weren't quite coming clear through on that first page of the handout, other things that I can clarify, or just things for us to talk about with IMTSS and measurement.
I have a question. I
Great.
was just wondering, so sorry, my name's Amanda Working. I'm from Virginia as well, with Regina. And I was just wondering, based off of the study that you did, do you recommend like IMTSS be done once a year or multiple times? And I know you may not have had the opportunity, but how has the information helped the school, like help teams integrate into their action plans and implementation plans? Like, based off compared to their, traditional instruments that they were using, have they found benefits for their own planning, internal planning?
These are great questions. I'm actually going to start with your second one. And I mentioned that the usability of our tool was very important to us. In fact, we had a separate research question that aimed to understand the costs and the benefits of our tool. And we were really pleased to find that the results that I've got here presented, because that's actually not on the handout that you received, and that the tool was definitely offered valuable information to the school. And let me specify that the IMFR is administered to a school level MTSS leadership team. And through the questions that we ask them, then we generate the ratings, and then we provided those ratings, those 14 item level ratings, to the school. And the schools then, the MTSS leadership team told us that those ratings were in fact valuable, that they were fair, that they were pretty accurate in how they understood their school to be implementing IMTSS, but that it offered in a better understanding of what specifically to do to improve. Because the way that each of those 14 items are rated is a very criteria by criteria process. So for example, in tier 1, there are 3 specific research-based features that we know need to be in place for high quality tier 1 reading, math, or social emotional behavioral instruction. And so in the tool and in the ratings, schools can understand how they rated on each of those 3 features, so that they can see in reading, for example, in tier 1, we really don't have evidence-based curriculum in place in reading, but we do in social emotional behavioral. So they can drill down and use that information to better understand what their strengths and weaknesses are, and then better improve where they go from there. And I do want to also add 2 things here about that, is that the school teams were able to interpret the results, but they needed help figuring out what to do next. How do we prioritize with all of the information that we have in these results? How do we figure out what's a next best step for us? And that part is where schools need a lot of help. I also want to acknowledge that it takes a lot of time to administer this tool, and I'm talking 3 to 4 hours. We worked so hard to try to reduce that amount of time, but we found that we just couldn't get the detailed level of information that schools needed to be able to understand and to rate accurately and to result in a tool that was psychometrically sound. So that is just another piece of it. But that's the long answer to your question, is that schools were able to use are able to look at their results and say that this is useful information and see where they need to improve, but they need help in figuring out, okay, well, out of all of these weaknesses and strengths, how do we prioritize the top 5 quick wins that we can take? You had another part of your question, but and maybe could you ask me that again, please?
I was just asking about how often, like, is this an annual only tool,
Yeah.
like, or is this something that should be like with the TFI? You usually do it, you do it early, you do it once a year, and then a lot of times they progress monitor on certain items to see about growth during the course of the year that they might work on. Like, sometimes, like you said, like quick wins, like things that they're actively planning or implementing around, and see what changes they have in scores based off that work they've done. So I was just wondering if this is just an once a year thing, or um multiple times. Do they progress monitor certain items that they're working around something?
Yeah, we did design it to be administered once a year, and it certainly could be administered like in a fall to spring type fashion. And we were reluctant to encourage any more of that because of the amount of time that it takes to develop, to go through the process and generate the scores. However, I think the nature of the tool and the results themselves lend themselves to progress monitoring, so that you'd be able to look at the criteria and the results and check to see if progress is being made without going through the full formal administration process at like a January time point, for example. Great question. I think we've got something else in the chat. Makes sense. Hop back over to our questions here. All right, not hearing anything else. I will push us forward a little bit into breakouts. So we've got about 10 minutes or so. Let me do a time check. Yeah, we do have about 10 minutes or so for a short breakout. And I think we'll have time for like report out afterward. So when you get into your breakout, please make sure to identify a reporter who could share the kind of the summary of what your breakout group discussed. We've got 3 questions here that we're hoping you can figure out what you'd like to talk about with your partners, and then come back, as I said, ready to report out what your conversations were like. And I think Kelsey will get us into our breakout rooms here. Yeah, so we'll have anyone start us off, a brave volunteer to kick off our reporting out.
I'll share out for the group or room 2, I think it was. We talked about the question about external versus internal facilitation of fidelity measures, and just a good conversation about it. Kind of depends on maybe where we are in the process. We might need more external facilitation to support the team in having good quality conversations versus just, say, going through the motions of checking boxes and scoring. But maybe eventually our goal would be that this turns into more of an internal ownership of the process and really having conversations on the team. So that was the one thing that we talked about.
Thank you for picking us off there. How about another group?
I'll talk.
Go for it, Kelly.
Kelly Churchwright from Ohio. We've been working at MTSS for a while, trying to get various things in place. I feel like we're doing things at 2 levels or 5, it's all at the same time. We talked, I think it was room 3, about just overwhelm in tools, right? And trying to help people through processes about like which tool is better than another, why put the investment into this, what are you going to get out of it? And then, challenges about turnover, when you got to train in all new people at district level or even state about, what is this? Where are we going with it? Where have we been? Why should we choose something new? All that kind of thing. But we also really liked the questions on the second page of this handout, because those are always great for conversations and for redirecting stuff and reorganizing people to focus on what they can handle now and where are they, so that they can ask the next questions.
All right, thanks, Kelly. Yeah, and I put that second handout up as well, just a little screenshot of it. And I think we have one more group to hear from.
I think that might have been the group that I was in, and we did not do a very good job of grabbing the questions before we went into our group. So we might have gotten a little bit off track. We were talking about the component of time and the potential relationship between the district capacity assessment and the TFI for those of us that already use the district capacity assessment. And that was our main bullet points in terms of that, but we may have missed the boat on the actual questions.
That's all right. Always good to have the conversation that you need and the time that you need to have it in with the colleagues who are in the room. So no worries about that at all. Let's see. I think there was one other thing. Oh, just I failed to mention how our tool is administered. We have studied it extensively through an external administration. And so right now we can say it is a reliable and valid tool for measuring IMTSS at the elementary school level when administered by someone external to the school. We are piloting a self-assessment version that kind of streamlines out some of the complexity of it while still trying to retain the rigor, but this is a pilot. And so we won't have like 2 versions of the info that we'll be releasing. We'll just have that the main externally administered version, but that's not to say someone couldn't use it for self-assessment. There will not be an info police officer out there to check to make sure that it has been administered in the way. But of course, that's where we know that the results are valid and reliable. Just something I forgot to mention before. All right, so I know we're getting close to the end of our time. I mentioned that we are launching our official release date here is on March 14th at CEC. Please join us there if you're also there, and stop by our table over where they have all of the booths, or just find us online at the MTSS Center website. You can also just reach out to me via email. I'd be happy to talk with you further about the tool, the suite of materials, and or support for schools, districts, and states in integration of MTSS and measuring it. I think I turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you. There's a question from Scott Ekman. Were schools in the study already completing assessments such as the TFI and RTFI? If so, did this replace those?
Yeah, a lot of our schools were already measuring using something. It might have been the TFI. There were a lot of different measures that were in place. And another thing that I forgot to mention is that we actually looked at over 34 tools that were in existence. And that's why a lot of our, domains and items are not that unfamiliar, because we used existing tools as a starting point for our tool development. And I'm not sure if schools have switched at this point, but I do know that they found it to be valuable. So time will tell.
Does that answer your question, Scott?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, good. All right. And you know what? This is why Jennifer is one of my favorite presenters, because she took the homework I was going to give and she put it into her slides, which never happens. So those questions that one of the groups pointed out, they really appreciated. I think these are the questions that we will consider for our next discussion. Specifically, does your SPDIGS MTSS ensure that core academic instruction includes reinforcement of school-wide and class-wide social emotional behavior supports? It may or may not, it's just conversation. Do we have access to social emotional behavior supports, interventions and strategies? Are staff trained? And do tier 2 and 3 interventions include components of academic and social emotional behavior? And what does the W stand for, Jennifer?
Oh, I thought it was our original version of social emotional behavioral
Oh,
wellness.
okay.
So we streamlined it. Sorry.
Wellness. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would have ever gotten to that.
Right.
For students with multiple needs, but you have to say, someone was talking about overwhelmed by tools. I was listening to Janine Garofalo stand up recently, and she's talking about being overwhelmed and how she couldn't get under the whelm. And I was thinking like, overwhelmed. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. We really appreciate you coming to visit with us, Jennifer. And thank you for everyone having a good discussion, being engaged. Just be considering your 3 takeaways from today or any lingering questions, because Jennifer is still available for us, and also any next steps you'll take. Great to see you, Kelsey. Thank you for organizing, and everyone have a good afternoon.